I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, much attention is still being directed towards Israeli politics. In the aftermath of the Kadima party's leaving the historic mega coalition of 92 Knesset members, which was created when the new leader of the moderate Kadima party, General Shaul Mofaz, did a complete turnabout and agreed to join the majority coalition of Likud and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Many Israelis were very optimistic that such a broad unity coalition of Israel's two largest parties would pave the way for significant reforms in a number of social and political areas, dealing with national service for the ultra-Orthodox and Arab Israeli communities, reforming the electoral process to eliminate the undue influence wielded by tiny extreme religious parties that have always held narrow coalition governments hostage, and even to possibly help promote the peace process. And one of the most optimistic voices was that of Isi Leibler, the former leader of Australian Jewry, who is now one of the most thoughtful of all Israeli columnists, writing for the Jerusalem Post. And we're very pleased to say that Isi is also a member of the Shalom TV commentator staff. Isi, thank you so much for joining us again from Jerusalem.
It's my pleasure.
So, Isi, you were so optimistic about the potential good that could have come out of this mega unity coalition of Likud and Kadima. Why do you think Kadima pulled out? Why did the coalition fail?
I think the coalition failed because Kadima were simply not serious about the whole business from the outset, because it is inconceivable how Mofaz could have gone into this and then pulled out in this way. I must confess that I think that our Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, made a big mistake by impulsively, in my opinion, dissolving the committee. But the moment he realized the mistake had been made, he tried to rectify it, but there was no going back. And what I found really outrageous was that Plesner, the man who was chairing the committee, actually became far more aggressive afterwards than he had been before. 2 months before, the program which he had put up, which had achieved pretty much of a consensus, was the one that General Ya'alon basically adopted, but it was rejected. It's a very, very great tragedy for the Jewish people if a reform does not take place.
I want to make sure people understand what you're referring to. The committee you're referring to was the one set up inside the Knesset to deal with the aftermath of the repeal of the int'l law, which would again then pave the way for the IDF or for other forms of national service to draw upon both the ultra-Orthodox community and the Arab Israeli community. And there was a committee established with a Kadima member as its head, which was commissioned. Its mission was to try to come up with some kind of way in which now a rollout would occur that would bring again both ultra-Orthodox and Arab Israelis into some form of national service. And Isi, I think what you're saying is that you are critical of, first, Netanyahu's dissolving that committee when it seemed to be going nowhere and when Kadima seemed to be pulling out. And number two, you're critical of the Kadima leader who was in charge of it for taking a rather extreme position inside the committee. Do I have it right?
You have it right, and he was not taking that extreme position 2 months before.
Yes.
That's what makes this even more outrageous.
Why do you think, then, he changed his position after the coalition came into being?
I believe that the main reason they came in for this coalition was to avoid an immediate election which suggested they would go down the tubes and lose dramatically down to, small numbers. They could drop by as much as 70, 80, even more percent. And they thought that by holding on some time, this would give them a chance to get back.
So, Isi, you believe this was done, both Mofaz's joining the coalition was really a crass political move to forestall an election which Mofaz believed would be detrimental to the Kadima party.
Yes.
And Kadima then pulled out, knowing that at this stage in the game, the elections will not be held early, and the term basically will run out, and we'll have elections at the scheduled time.
And they're trying to set themselves up as the heroes who are going to not compromise on this issue by being totally inflexible. And they're hoping that this sort of demagoguery will appeal to the people and that they will gain votes. I don't believe that will be the case.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any sense of what the reaction has been on the street in Israel to the collapse of the coalition, and do other people see it the way you do?
Look, there are many views on this. I think there's a general belief that there's a mess-up has taken place. I think that Likud is going to suffer from this if they don't find a solution as well. And I think the biggest winners in this particular situation will be the Labour Party and fledgling new parties that will come up just with a one policy of bringing in proper conscription. That is why Netanyahu is trying so desperately now to find an alternative solution. But it's not going to be easy because everybody's pushing their own barrow. The right wing, headed by Lieberman, Yisrael Beitenu, is saying we will not go ahead with this unless it applies to everybody over the age of 18, which sounds great and is very, attractive. But it's a populist approach because there is no way that you can get 60,000 people with the Haredi backgrounds that they are overnight into the army. It's something that has to be done in an evolutionary and gradual manner so as not to have a total disruption in society. And above all, the IDF itself has made it very clear they could not absorb all these people at once without making special provisions and reorganizing themselves. Even the issue of national service, which was going to be given to them as an option, cannot apply if we don't have the proper arrangement set up, because we don't want them doing national service, which will amount to another siphon into yeshivot, of money just going into yeshivot. That's not national service. There has to be intelligent, coherent national service, both for Israelis, both for Haredim, and for Arabs. And that's something that can't be done overnight. So the idea was to start this slowly and to double and triple the figures of Haredim and hopefully, ultimately, get everybody involved.
And Isi, wasn't that the Alon plan?
That is effectively the Alon plan, which gives the Haredim a chance to put it off a few years, but ultimately it's moving towards doubling the numbers in the army immediately now, and over the years, ultimately covering most of them, giving an exemption for some, 1,000, 1,500, or whatever it may be, or 2,000, that may just work exclusively on studying Torah. Now, I'm not personally in favor of that, but there is a case for that to be made, and I don't think most people are going to be upset about that. We're concerned that there are 60 or 70,000 people currently not in the army, currently not preparing themselves to earn a livelihood, and this is part of a demographically growing group, and it is extremely distressing and worrying.
Now, why would Kadima not be willing to accept this gradual evolution process, and why would they be insisting that it be all or nothing immediately?
I believe that a lot of this is posturing. You have to understand that Kadima is not a coherent party. It's a combination of all sorts of groups and factions. There's a faction that want to undermine Mofaz, that were supporting Isi Leibler, and there are other groups against him. And the party itself is not coherent. And Mofaz is not in a position to gain control, so he's trying to go ahead and find some common denominator. And the common denominator is a bad one for Israel, is a bad one for Kadima, and in my opinion, will spell the end politically of Mofaz himself as well.
And one more time, Isi, what do you think this means politically for Benjamin Netanyahu?
It means that if when he does go to elections sometime within the next 12 to 15 months, he must have a solution which he can convince the majority of the Israelis that he is not going to be beholden to the Haredim, that he is not, as they suggest, giving in to them because he needs to have them for the future. He's prepared to do what is good for the country and stand up to them. And to be able to do that and to do it in a meaningful manner without going to an extreme is a very, very difficult task, and he has to overcome that.
And Isi, you are saying that you expect this to hurt Kadima in the upcoming election.
I think Kadima is a dead force in Israeli politics. It will break up and will become a very, very small number of splinter groups with many of their people disappearing. The big beneficiaries in this will be the Labour Party, which has an opportunity of building itself up again into a very strong alternative government. The new party that is being set up primarily on the grounds of conscripting people. And, of course, Lieberman will also take advantage of this by saying, I refuse to compromise, I want everything or nothing. And Bibi has a very difficult challenge ahead of him. The big plus that he's got is that there is no conceivable person that could actually be conceived of as prime minister. And with all that's going on and with all the anger, everybody overwhelmingly looks upon him as the next prime minister. But if he loses votes and if his party becomes destabilized as a result of that, it will not be a good thing for the country or for him.
Okay, Isi, I want to change focus with you. Recently, a former justice of the Israeli Supreme Court, Edmund Levy, concluded a commission study for Prime Minister Netanyahu to determine whether Israeli settlements on the West Bank violate international law or not. And the Levy Commission findings now are that first, according to the definition of military occupations, Israel is not legally occupying the West Bank, and that Israel is not violating any international law by building settlements on the West Bank, and that, in fact, it has every right to build settlements on the West Bank. And then Justice Levy sort of expressed his own personal feelings, encouraging the Israeli government to build more West Bank settlements. And as one might imagine, the United States has criticized the Levy Commission's conclusions, and many mainstream American Jews who are extremely supportive of the state of Israel in general are now concerned that the Levy Commission has in some way done harm to the potential peace process with the Palestinians, and that it has done harm to Israel's international standing. So, Isi, what was your reaction to the Levy Commission report, and how do you view the whole subject?
One has to break this up into two levels. One has to break this up into a legal level and a political level. On a legal level, I believe that the Commission is right on the ball. There is not an occupation, and if you look at their reasoning and all the arguments they put up, this is a very, very logical reasoning. These are disputed territories. If there's not an occupation, it was never a state, and I think there's a very, very strong case for it. On the political level, if this is going to be used to promote extensive settlement outside of the major settlement blocks, many Israelis and others will consider that it could be creating major problems. And I think that Bibi, again, has a major problem with it. There are many people in his party that want him to adopt this. Now, he can adopt it legally, but if he's going to go and start promoting settlement in outlying areas, which are ultimately in the days of Mashiach, perhaps, but whenever it comes, when you have a real Arab leader that is looking for peace, going to be part of Arab territory, it could create many problems. So you're going to have quite a few people not happy if it's going to be used for that purpose. Most of us believe that ultimately, given peace, which I can't see now, but given peace perhaps, if not in our times, in the days of our children or grandchildren, there should be two states. The ideal, of course, will be that Jews who are living in those territories will have the right to live there in the same way as Arab Israelis have the right to live here. But we're far away from that at this stage. That, of course, would be the ideal. At the moment, this could cause political problems for the government for the reasons I've spelt out, because it will give an excuse for many of the outsiders and many of the people that are critical of Israel to jump and to start bashing us on settlements, and that is not the central issue that we're confronted with today. Mm-hmm. It is not. I mean, we should be building up, in my opinion, settlements that are part of the settlement bloc and building up Israel, not looking to extend beyond at this stage.
Isi, it seems so obvious. Why would Prime Minister Netanyahu create a commission which would, in essence, drop this time bomb in his lap?
You have to understand that the Prime Minister is the head of a political party which has some fairly aggressive elements within it that want to express their views and believe that this is right. And I don't think he's overjoyed at having to cope with this, but that's what a Prime Minister has to cope with, and he's going to have to find some way of keeping his party together and at the same time not having this being used against Israel in a big way overseas.
Okay, one more thing. Isi, you're embroiled now, I'm tempted to say once again, in a bit of a war of words. You recently wrote a very strong piece criticizing the head of British Jewry, Mick Davis, who's the head of Great Britain's United Jewish Israel Appeal, for appointing what you called an extremist critic of Israel named Joseph Millis to be the PR and communications manager of the UJIA. And in your piece, you wrote that Mick Davis's most contemptible remark was his arrogant assertion that the government of Israel has to recognize that there are actions which impact directly on us as Jews living in the UK. When they do good things, it is good for us. When they do bad things, it is bad for me. The impact on me is as significant as it is on Jews living in Israel. I trust them to recognize this. So, first, Isi, explain why this remark really was so upsetting to you, and then talk to me about Mick Davis and Joseph Millis.
Well, this remark is symptomatic of an approach which Mr. Davis was calling on British Jews to be critical of Israel and also complaining that Netanyahu was responsible for the breakdown of the peace process. Now, for a person to hold those views, fine, but for a person in a leading position, heading the organization which is supposed to be raising funds for Israel and to be making such statements, I don't think you would find any mainstream American Jewish leader, an American Jewish Committee, a World Jewish Congress, anybody making statements of that sort. If they did, there would be an upheaval. I mean, we can have these views privately, and for him to be promoting such views, I think is highly questionable, particularly in a country which has become the headquarters of the campaign for BDS, the campaign to boycott Israeli goods, a country which has got booming anti-Semitism. For all of these things, I think it's contemptible for a Jewish leader to be making these sorts of noises. But that's something that happened in the past. What shocked me much more was to appoint a man who has gone on record, and I stress gone on record, calling for a boycott of Israeli settlements. A man who has compared Israel to Iran and even to Syria. To appoint such a man, whatever his other qualifications may be, to be the public relations and communications head of the United Jewish Israel Appeal is, to my mind, just surrealistic. And I can't believe that this could take place. Now, Mr. Young has, since I've written that piece, insisted that he's never met him and knows nothing about.
Yes, you wrote that Millis is a far-left extremist who has publicly called for a boycott of goods from Israeli settlements, stressing that he includes East Jerusalem, and he says it is unquestionably occupied territory. You also wrote that Millis has alleged that Israel is being murdered in its sleep by zealots, and that Israel isn't Judaism, and that it is becoming a footnote in history. Now, we invited Mr. Millis to join this program. Mr. Millis declined, saying that he had published a response to your critique and that the response speaks for itself. And here is the essence of Mr. Millis's answer to you, Isi Leibler. Number one, he is not a spokesman for UJIA. Number two, he was not appointed by Mick Davis, and he's never met him. Number three, he is a proud Zionist. Number four, he is proud to have served for 3 years in an IDF combat unit. 5, he is totally opposed to the BDS movement, even when it is limited to settlers on the West Bank. We have right here quotations from Joe Millis's own tweet and blog, in which he wrote, and this is on July 11th, 2011, "I urge a boycott of settlement produce and of settlers, so sue me." There was already a Facebook group with more than 3,300 members entitled, "Sue Me, I am boycotting settlement produce." And then Robert Snodgrass wrote to Joe Millis saying, "Boycotting fellow Jews, Joe? Your mother must be very proud of you. By the way, do you class East Jerusalem as, quote, occupied territory, unquote?" And Millis responded, "Snodgrass, when I was a kid, we didn't go to Spain because of Franco. We didn't go to Greece because of the colonels. We didn't buy South African goods until Mandela was freed. So yes, I am suspect my mother would be proud. And I am calling for buying Israeli produce, not that from the settlements. East Jerusalem is occupied territory too." And someone wrote back, "That's okay, Millis. Every time someone has tried to boycott Israeli goods, sales go up. Keep up the good work." Millis's response, "They aren't Israeli goods, they are settlement goods. I urge a boycott of them and those who live in the toxic settlements." So Isi, at least as recently as last year, Joe Millis was calling for a boycott of goods, certainly from the West Bank territories and from East Jerusalem.
I must say to you that as recently as 2 months ago, I have another quotation from him calling for a boycott of settlements. Now, if he's had a change of heart, I would submit that that change of heart has taken place because he's trying to maintain his employment. And to say he's not a spokesman for UJIA when he's appointed the public relations chairman and communications head is rather meaningless. And if Mr. Davis, as I said, was unaware of his background and his outrageous attitude towards Israel, then I would suggest he can't use that excuse now. What is he doing about it? Till now, there's been a curtain of silence by the British Jewish establishment. They've all run for cover. Mr. Davis is an enormously powerful man and wields money around in a very, very major manner. A lot of organizations are beholden to him and his group and are remaining quiet. I believe that there is no Jewish community in the world, and I say in the world, in the Western world, that would tolerate such a person as the public relations head of an organization which is committed to promoting the case of Israel and is supposed to appeal to all Jews. He's entitled to have whatever odious views he wants, but he certainly cannot have such a man appointed to such a position. And as I say, if he has really repented and had a change of heart, it's a shame he didn't do it a year ago. It's a shame he's doing it now. And I would submit that it's a little bit late for now, and you would expect a little hiatus after these abominations before a man jumps into that position. As I've said elsewhere, it's like taking someone who is promoting the values of meat and overnight without him taking it back, making him the representative of vegetarian society. It's ridiculous and it's outrageous. And I cannot, for the love of me, understand how British Jewish leaders can look at themselves in the mirror and retain a person in such a position. It is, to my mind, one of the worst things I've encountered, and I'm really deeply distressed about it because Anglo-Jewry deserves much, much better. And through the letters and communications I've had from so many Jews in England since I've written that piece, who are not readers of the Jerusalem Post, who must have heard of it elsewhere, suggests to me that the leadership is totally out of key with its membership.
Isi Leibler, it is always a joy to talk to you. I appreciate your insight, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness with which you approach every subject. And you know, it's interesting, in a time, Isi, when people tend to be so dogmatic, right or left, it is a pleasure to speak to someone who tries to see the subject from within itself and to give as objective a view as possible. And I appreciate so much you're always making yourself available to me and to the Shalom TV audience. And I wish you kol tuv v'hatzlacha, and I hope to see you very soon.
Thank you very, very much, and it's a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you, Isi. You be well. And those were the thoughts of Isi Leibler, who, of course, is a major columnist on the Israeli scene. He writes for the Jerusalem Post. He can also be seen online, and I hope all of you who are interested in hearing what Isi has to say will go to Leibler.com. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.